Welcome back to Java Programmer. In this video, we're going to set up the config command and the quit command. And so here we are having to add in some dependencies that we're going to use for doing these commands and doing the config. So we use a package called smallRye-config. This gives us the ability to load configurations. We use Project Lombok, which so that we don't have to use getters and setters, and then a library that I wrote in order to save objects to and from a file. So we have the dependencies, we do a test compile, make sure everything is going to work. Everything so far looks good. Quick test, make sure we didn't break anything, and we are able to still parse commands. So now we're going to take a look at our grammar file and start to refactor that. So we need to split out each of the 7 commands because we're going to start working with them individually. And in this first section, having the word command on all of them is redundant, so I go ahead and I remove that from all the different rules, and I specify that the input, which I changed from command to input, is going to return a command, and the quit command is what's going to be next. And so I add also in the quit and exit, so you can type either one to get exit the program. So this exit's going to return a quit command, and that will be captured up here in running quit. Also, I have to restructure how we're pulling, how the parser brings the command in. So now we actually have a command object because we're returning it out of the parser. So the parser is going to grab the input variable, that's why I changed the name, and the command that was returned through that input. And then once it has that command, which is a generic command, it's that command interface, it can run the execute on it. And so whatever command gets sent back, it can execute it. So here I go and I create a new folder called commands, and in here is where I create an interface. I'm going to specify 2 methods that they all must implement, which is execute and print. Then I'm going to have a base class called command. This is going to implement the interface. And all commands will extend this command. So now I go ahead and I create my quit command. That's going to extend our base command. And so I have to include the override methods, which in the execute, all a quit command is going to do is exit the program. And we put in a print message. Also, because we have now added some more commands, I need to include them so that the parser has access to them, because the parser is going to have to return them. That command did not get included. So here we have compile, it works. So config print, these are still broke because now they're returning null. But quit works and exit works. You can see the index is still broken, but exit and quit work. So from here, I go and I am going to implement the config. And so I start out with a class called config helper. This is what's going to do a lot of the work, and the commands are just going to basically run methods inside the config helper. So the config helper, I just create it here. It's not going to really do anything at the moment. We'll come back to this class later on. Now for all the different commands. Well, we're starting with the config command. This is a config base command. So all the config commands are going to extend this config base command. So I'm basically creating a hierarchy tree structure of classes that's going to help us get through here. And this config command is going to have an instance of the config helper because all the config commands are going to use that config helper and are going to call methods on it. So we have our config helper. I revisit this because we want to make sure that we don't create a new instance every time. We're going to actually turn it into a singleton, but we do that later. So here we're going to build out the config variable. So when a config comes in, we're going to pass that command back out. Config now returns a config command, and we name our args now. Our args take on the names of name and value. We create a config print command, a config set command, a config load command. That arg takes on the name of file name, and we are able to pass that file name.txt into our object. And so here we are creating all the different classes. So our first class is the set. Now, I actually implemented the get here, and later on I will switch it because this is actually the get class and not the set class. I didn't notice that when I was typing all this code in. But the execute here is basically going to call the config helper and say, hey, I want to get this particular config option. Here we're going to, we're implementing the load. And so this is so that we can load from a file. There you can see we called the config helper dot load file name. So we're going to load a config. This one's a print. So in this case, we're just going to tell the config helper, hey, go ahead and print your config, your loaded one. Here we are going to have the save command. And again, we're going to tell the config helper, just save your config off to the file name that was passed in. Here's where I realized that I got them swapped, so I switch out the get and the set. So now the get is already implemented, and now I actually implement the set. So now this gets passed in a name and a value, and it's going to call the config helper, and it says put name and value into your config. So now we have to implement the config helper for all these methods. So I'm going to turn it into a singleton here where I have a private instance of itself. There's a map, which is the actual config. That's where we're going to store all the variables. So I start using the small-ri config builder. This is what will read configs either from the command line or from environment variables or different places. And so you can implement a interface for your different variables. So in this case, I'm going to have three variables. One that's called prot, or the protocol, one's called host, and one's called port. And right here, I can define the default values. I tell the service config, hey, I want to use the mapping of this class to get your variables. And I then put those default variables into the config map. And so the program will interact with the config map, but the config map is what's going to get saved to and from disk. So here's the get method. I just call a get on that map. Here's a put. I basically just call the put method on that map. And then we have the load and save. Now, the thing is with the load and save, we'll come back to those later. So here's where I set up the singleton, where I check to see if the instance is null. If so, I create a new instance, or if it isn't null, I just return the current instance. Here I implement the print method, so I'm just basically going to loop through the map, printing out the entries, the key and value pairs, so that we can print the config to the screen. I do a make sure everything looks good. I forgot to switch this over to the singleton. Now it's only going to have a single instance, and I try it out. Look, and I print the config, and the config shows those three default values. And I forgot to actually implement the get here in the grammar. So I added the grammar for the get call, and now I can say config get.eshost, and it'll print out a single variable. So next we want to implement the load and the save. Now I wrote a library that is used for saving objects to disk. You basically pass it an object, you pass it a file name, and it'll store it to disk. It's called object storage, and I got these swapped. Instead of loading, I'm actually writing to the disk. Instead of saving, I'm actually reading from disk. And I didn't notice that until a little bit later. And I realized I had the wrong version. Now I'm able to bring that in there, and it works. So the load and the save both throw errors. So I want to catch those errors and not just fail. And so we print the error of the reason. I'm going to take that and put it over in the other one. So load and save. I thought I had got my messaging wrong when I first ran it to try to figure out why the saves were not working right. It saved a file. I'm like, why is it not able to read? Or why is it trying to read a file instead of save a file? So that was when I realized that I had got the two swapped. So we swap those around so that it's actually doing what we want it to do. And now I go and I test it. Compile it first, make sure we've got the latest code compiled into the binary. And now we test it. So config print, see what show the default values. Yep. So now I'm going to set one of those values. I'm going to set the host to something different, so localhost 2, and then print again, see that it's changed. And now I'm going to save that out to a file. And then I'm going to exit the program. And then I'm going to run it again and do a print and show that it's gone back to the default values. But now I'm going to actually load that file and see that we had the original values from the prior time. And there it is, localhost 2. So in this video, we set up the config and we set up the quit. And in the next video, we'll actually start getting to it into Elasticsearch. So thanks for watching and see you next time.